Is justice really blind? I mean, we all like to think so, right? But today, we're diving into some research that might make you think twice. Get this, we're about to unpack some statistics that are pretty hard-hitting.
Oh, I can imagine. You ready to jump in?
Absolutely. So we're looking at this text about legal studies, specifically whether everyone really is on equal footing in the eyes of the law, or if maybe, just maybe, there are other factors at play.
Right, because the ideal and the reality don't always line up.
Exactly. Unit 10, it throws out a pretty jarring statistic right off the bat. In the U.S., black men are incarcerated at a rate almost 12 times higher than white men.
12 times. Wow.
Yeah, 12. It makes wonder, how can that be possible if justice is truly blind to things like race and socioeconomic status?
Yeah, it really makes you question the system, doesn't it? And, you know, this isn't just a random statistic. The text digs into the systemic issues behind this disparity.
Like what?
Well, for starters, it talks about how deeply ingrained racial stereotypes are, and how those stereotypes can actually seep into law enforcement practices, even sentencing.
You mean like implicit bias and all that?
Exactly. Imagine, just for a second, constantly seeing news stories that portray a certain demographic in a negative light. Even if you don't realize it, that constant exposure can subtly shape how you perceive people from that group.
So it's like those unconscious biases we might not even be aware of can actually have real-world consequences.
Unfortunately, yes, and it doesn't stop there. The study also dives into socio-economic disparities and the impact those have. Because think about it, the quality of legal representation you can afford, even just understanding how to navigate the legal system, those are all influenced by your economic background.
So it's more than just having your day in court. It's about whether you even have the resources to ensure it's a fair fight in the first place.
Exactly. And, you know, we've seen real-life examples of this play out in the media. Remember the college admissions scandal a while back with Felicity Huffman?
Oh, right. She ended up serving a very short sentence for her role in that whole mess.
And that's what the text uses as an example. Because here you have a wealthy, well-connected individual facing potentially decades behind bars for mail fraud, but ultimately receiving a surprisingly lenient sentence. Compare that to data showing that Black and Hispanic individuals often receive harsher sentences, even when the socioeconomic factors are similar.
It's a stark contrast, for sure.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, does that tie back into the systemic bias the source was talking about?
Absolutely. This case really underscores how wealth and connections can often lead to more lenient treatment within the justice system. It's like having a skilled lawyer who knows the ins and outs versus trying to navigate this incredibly complex system on your own.
Right, you're not really on equal footing, even if in theory you're supposed to be.
Exactly. Now, in fairness, the text does acknowledge that there have been some positive strides made in diversifying legal professions. But it also stresses that we have a long way to go in dismantling those ingrained biases that are still very much at play.
So we're seeing some cracks in this idea of blind justice. But the source doesn't completely disregard the arguments for why true justice might be achievable, right?
Right.
There have been, at least on the surface, some promising developments, like declining imprisonment rates across all racial demographics and the recent push for legal reforms.
Yeah, and the pro-argument, if you will, that the text presents is that these trends are signs of progress, that maybe, just maybe, we're inching closer to a more equitable system.
So there's hope.
Well, the text doesn't say it's hopeless, but it also urges us to look deeper. Like, can we really just take these declining rates at face value, or could they be influenced by other factors that maybe the text doesn't directly address?
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Changes in policing strategies or revised sentencing guidelines for certain offenses, those could also contribute to declining rates. It doesn't necessarily mean the underlying issues of bias are gone.
It's like we're looking at a piece of a puzzle, but not the whole picture.
Exactly. And speaking of the big picture, there's this really powerful quote from Robert Kennedy that the source uses, and I think it speaks to this complexity. He said, "The glory of justice and the majesty of law are created not just by the Constitution, nor by the courts, nor by the officers of the law, nor by the lawyers, but by the men and women who constitute our society, who are the protectors of the law as they are themselves protected by the law."
That's quite a statement. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, to me, it says that even if, hypothetically, we had a flawless legal system, the way that system is actually applied, how it impacts people's lives, that's shaped by the attitudes and behaviors of society as a whole.
So it's not just about laws on paper, but about who we are as a society. It's a sobering thought. And speaking of impactful, there's this infographic in the document that really caught my eye.
Oh yeah, what's that about?
It breaks down some pretty alarming statistics about racial disparities in incarceration rates.
Hmm.
And we're not talking small differences here. These are major discrepancies. Like, for example, did you know black women are incarcerated at more than twice the rate of white women?
Wow.
Yeah, more than double.
Yeah.
It's more than double. It really makes you stop and think, what contributes to a gap that big? Makes you wonder what's really going on beneath the surface.
It definitely does. And the infographic itself doesn't really get into the reasons behind those disparities, but the text does offer some potential clues. Remember our conversation about white-collar crime?
Yeah, those offenses usually connected with, like, corporations and high finance,
Yeah.
fraud, embezzlement, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And the text points out that there's been a significant decrease in prosecutions for those types of offenses. Even as overall crime rates, they've actually gone up.
Interesting. So we're seeing fewer prosecutions for white-collar crime, but more people overall ending up in prison.
Right. And when you consider the overrepresentation of Black and Hispanic individuals within the prison system, that juxtaposition, it really stands out, raises some important questions.
Are you suggesting there might be a connection there? Like, is it possible that the justice system is coming down harder on certain types of crime while others are maybe slipping through the cracks?
It's definitely something to think about. I mean, the text doesn't explicitly state a cause and effect there, but these intertwined trends, they make you question where the priorities are when it comes to law enforcement.
So we've got this system that's supposed to be blind, but it seems to be tripping over these ingrained biases, these inconsistencies. And then you add in those really concerning racial disparities in incarceration rates and the possibility that some offenses are under more scrutiny than others. It paints a complicated picture, to say the least.
It does, and it really underscores the main point this text is making. Achieving true justice is not simple. There are so many layers. Remember that quote from Robert Kennedy we talked about how intertwined our attitudes are with how justice actually plays out?
Absolutely. The idea that if we as a society are supposed to be the protectors of the law, then we're also responsible for examining those biases, for making things more equitable.
Exactly, and the text really emphasizes this point. Reform can't just be about changing laws. It has to involve a collective shift in perspective, a real commitment to dismantling those deep-seated biases that are still influencing how justice is perceived and carried out.
So it's a call to action for all of us then, wouldn't you say? To be aware of our own biases, to speak out against injustice when we see it.
Precisely. And it circles us right back to that initial question. Can a justice system ever truly be blind when race, socioeconomic background, even unconscious bias, when those factors continue to impact outcomes?
The huge question, and one with huge implications. And while this deep dive doesn't exactly offer easy answers, it definitely leaves you with a lot to think about the world as it is right now, and maybe more importantly, the world we want to be living in.
It's about facing some of these uncomfortable things we've uncovered. The weight of history, how pervasive bias is, and how those things shape the reality of justice for real people.
Yeah, it's not a feel-good topic, that's for sure. But maybe the most important thing we can take away from this whole deep dive is that we all have a part to play in creating a more just future. It's not enough to just, hope for change. We have to be part of making it happen.
I completely agree. The text makes the point that if the law is supposed to be a reflection of our values, then it's on us to constantly look at those values, challenge the systems that aren't living up to them.
It's a journey, not a destination kind of thing. Always looking at our own biases, speaking up for those who are stuck in systems that aren't equitable.
Absolutely. We can't just wait around for someone else to fix a problem that needs everyone's attention. Everyone has the power to make a difference in their own way, to change minds, to demand better.
So where do we go from here? This deep dive has really shown us how complex the justice system is and how hard it is to build a truly fair society. But even with all that complexity, one thing's clear.
We can't lose sight of justice. It needs our constant attention, our critical thinking, our willingness to question how things are.
It's about having those tough conversations, pushing for transparency, holding people accountable, and never giving up on that goal of a world where justice isn't just an idea, but something everyone experiences.
That's the challenge and the opportunity before us. It takes ongoing education, empathy, really listening to each other, and a commitment to breaking down those systems that have allowed inequality to flourish.
Well said. And that wraps up our deep dive for today. We covered a lot, right? Uncovered some uncomfortable truths, asked some big questions.
We did, but those questions are important.
They really are. And remember, learning is a lifelong thing. Keep questioning, keep learning, keep challenging the world around you.
That's how things change.
Exactly. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and let's keep striving for a more just world for everyone.